A couple spent $28,000 on their dream cruise, but got deported before they ever saw the ship. A foster mom called the cruise line in advance, confirmed every document she needed, and was still turned away at the terminal. A man flew over 10,000 miles and got denied because he had a few loose stitches. Now, these aren't freak accidents, they're patterns. Some of these you've probably heard of before, but at least two on this list hit families in ways most cruisers have never even considered. One is a passport problem you can't fix at the port. One is a paperwork issue that the cruise industry just hasn't caught up to yet. Hi, I'm Melissa, a university professor who loves to cruise and who loves to talk ships. So let's talk about ways that you can be denied boarding on your cruise. Number one, before taking a cruise, most people check their passport expiration date, but they stop there. That's a big mistake. Why? Because a lot of countries and cruise lines require your passport to be valid for at least 6 months beyond your travel date. That means that if your passport doesn't expire until September, you might think you're A-okay for your cruise in May, but it's in violation of that 6 months rule. So it's always important to check. And my own boyfriend, who cruises with me monthly, and I reminded him, he would say nagged, repeatedly to renew his passport, almost fell prey to this himself recently, and he ended up with a last-minute emergency passport appointment for his renewal. But the expiration date isn't even the only thing that can get you. A 78-year-old man from England flew over 10,000 miles to Sydney and was denied boarding over what he described as loose stitching on his passport. His wife was cleared, he was not. This was on Cunard Cruise Lines, and they said the decision came from immigration authorities for a port on the itinerary, not from the cruise line itself. So this guy booked $1,500 in flights to get home. The passport was technically valid, but its physical condition ended his trip before it even started. So the takeaway here, check your passport date, but check the condition too. And if anything looks rough, always check and renew before you leave. Number two, and this is separate from passports entirely, visas are catching more cruisers than ever. A couple spent $28,000 on a Viking cruise through the Bay of Bengal and were denied entry to India and deported because they didn't have visas. I'm talking 20 hours of flying, which is brutal, but then a flight right back home. I can't even imagine. But this isn't limited to these more exotic itineraries either. A family was denied boarding a Norwegian cruise out of Seattle because they lacked a Canadian visa for a port that was on their itinerary. And they weren't even planning to get off the ship in Canada. It didn't matter. And if you're a UK traveler, mark this. Starting in late 2026, UK travelers will need ETIAs for 30 different European countries. It's not technically a visa, but it is mandatory. Now the takeaway here, if your ship stops there, you will need legal entry, even if you never plan to leave the ship. So it's important that you always check your cruise line documents. Most cruise lines are really good about communicating these things. For most cruises that are out of the United States and they're Caribbean, things like that, you're usually going to be fine. There's not these kind of issues. But if you're doing a European cruise that calls upon multiple countries that all have their own requirements, or a more exotic itinerary to some other continent, or sometimes Alaskan cruises, which we'll cover in a moment, make sure you dot your I's and cross your T's. Number three, this one makes people furious because you can see the ship. You can probably smell the buffet. But that gangway, it's closed. A group of 10 guests were refused boarding on an Oceania cruise out of Miami after arriving 30 minutes before departure due to flight delays. The ship sat in port for another half hour, but the manifest had already been filed with Customs and Immigration. Now, most cruise lines, they set final check-in 60 to 90 minutes before sailing. So that sail away time doesn't mean I can roll up right before that time. And there are usually no exceptions. The takeaway here, if you're flying in the same day, one, don't do it. If you do, you're playing stupid games. You're gonna win stupid prizes. I admit I've done it before under unique circumstances and I've been lucky. But if you do this, you're gambling your vacation on the roll of a dice with the airline's schedule and performance. So the most important thing is stay near the port the night before, fly in or drive in the night before. Okay, so the first three, they're classic documentation and logistics mistakes. Nothing too surprising. We hear these tragic tales all the time. But now the ones that blindside families. Number four, if a child under 18 is traveling with one parent or with grandparents or with any adult who is not a legal guardian, most cruise lines require a notarized consent form from the absent parent. Royal Caribbean, Norwegian, and MSC all state that failure to produce a notarized consent form for a minor can result in denied boarding with no compensation. That means no refund, no rebooking. If the child's last name doesn't match the traveling parents, you'll also need original supporting documents, which is why they always tell you you need a birth certificate or an adoption decree to prove the relationship. Now, I will say, I've cruised many, many times as a single mom with my daughter by myself. I do have a letter from my ex-husband. It's not notarized, but I have it. I've never once been asked for it. I've traveled with my niece before, never had an issue. But even if it's not an issue, 95% of the time, you don't want to be that unlucky person that doesn't have the required documentation, that 5% of the time. So the takeaway here, just get the notarized form. Do it, give yourself the peace of mind, because once you're at that terminal and you haven't done your legwork, you haven't done the things that you need, sometimes that ship has just sailed. Number five, and this one, is a genuine heartbreaker. My best friend was a foster parent for years before she adopted her son a couple of years ago, and she was always super paranoid about making sure that she had the right documentation when traveling with him, because if you're fostering a child, there's a lot of restrictions, and understandably so, around traveling with that child. So I used to think she was kind of overthinking it with kind of the paranoia, but she wasn't, because this is the tragic story. In December 2025, a foster mom named Amber Copland went viral on TikTok after Carnival denied boarding to one of her foster boys in Florida. Amber had called ahead. She confirmed everything that she needed with a Carnival representative, according to her. She said she did everything that a responsible parent would do. However, foster care documentation is just a whole different world. Foster parents often don't have access to original birth certificates, and court orders and guardianship papers can vary from state to state. And cruise lines, they're just not always equipped to know what to accept. The rest of Amber's family went ahead and boarded the ship without her, with her consent. She and her husband and the boy who was denied were left at the port with no accommodations. Now, it was really heartwarming. I followed this in real time. Amber shared her story on TikTok, and kudos to Hilton and some other companies that showed up and showed out and helped provide her family with accommodations and some attractions and some really, really great stuff. But Carnival Cruise Lines never did publicly respond to the situation. Now, the takeaway here, if you're a foster parent or kinship caregiver, contact the cruise line early. This is important. Get the answer in writing, and bring every legal document you have, even the ones that they don't ask for or they say they don't need. And when in doubt, always call again and get a second answer from a second person or even a third person. It's sad that you have to do your due diligence like this. You shouldn't have to, but the system is not built with you in mind. And my friend's instincts to over-prepare when traveling with a foster child was exactly right. Number 6, and I learned this one personally when I had a clothing steamer confiscated before I knew any better. This happened on one of my first cruises. I had to deal with wrinkled clothes. It's a problem that all cruisers have. And I now know better. Now, after every cruise, I like to stop by what I call the naughty table, N-A-U-T-I, isn't it clever? And I like to do the walk of shame. Sometimes I have had something confiscated, but I'm pretty good now. I don't usually do that, but I like to see what other people have had confiscated. And this is the table that the cruise line has of all the confiscated items that got taken at embarkation. So after the cruise, you go, you have your claim check, and you pick up your stuff. Far and away. Over and over. And I go after every cruise now for funsies. But it's always steamers and irons. Steamers and irons are the most common things sitting there. But the list of banned items on cruise ships just continues to grow. Royal Caribbean seems to be pretty much the most draconian line, and they now prohibit all power strips and extension devices, even those without surge protection. They are the rare cruise line that bans all of these. And that catches a lot of repeat cruisers who've been packing the same power strip for years. Hi, it's me. I've had my trusty travel extension cord, non-surge, confiscated by Royal Caribbean. Sometimes it gets through, but more often than not, they get it. And interestingly enough, cruise lines like Virgin Voyages, they allow the power strips, but it can only have 1 or max 2 outlets on it. I also learned that personally the hard way. So it's really important before you take a cruise and you pack for that cruise that you check and see what's allowed and what is not allowed. Because if you bring certain prohibited items, you can land in a lot of trouble. Now, most banned items like steamers and irons and extension cords, they're just gonna get confiscated and returned at debarkation. But anything involving drugs or weapons, they can result in denied boarding and even law enforcement involvement. So the takeaway here, check the prohibited item list for your specific cruise line before you pack. And you know better before you bring something nasty on a cruise. I'm talking weapons and drugs, but I have seen some weapons at the naughty table, knives that people should know better. They're not gonna let it on. So just don't even try to bring it. Number 7, this one surprises a lot of people, and I talk about this probably more often than people think I should. A DUI conviction can make you inadmissible to Canada. And I'm not talking a violent felony, I'm talking a DUI. And I don't wanna diminish the severity of a DUI. I'm not a drinker, DUI is a very serious thing. I grew up with an alcoholic dad who had many DUIs, so I don't wanna downplay the seriousness of it, but there are many cruisers who have the mindset of, oh, well, I just have a DUI, and they really get caught by surprise by this. If you book an Alaskan cruise, it's going to call on Canada. And there's a long story why, but it's gonna call on Canada. And in that case, you can be denied boarding before the ship even leaves the dock. Because even though you're going to Alaska, which is part of America, that one call in Canada is what's gonna give you issues. Because Canada is very, very strict about this. Now, there are some pathways to resolve Canadian inadmissibility if you have a record, even something like a DUI, but these things take planning and paperwork well in advance of your trip. Carnival may deny boarding to those who are convicted of aggravated physical assault, sexual assault, armed robbery, and other violent crimes. So the takeaway here, don't assume that just because you were able to book a cruise without a problem that you're in the clear. If you've got anything on your record, make sure you research the entry requirements for every country on your itinerary before you book and definitely before you head out for your cruise. Now, the last three. These are fitness to sail reasons, and cruise lines are enforcing them more aggressively than ever. Number 8, most cruise lines set the pregnancy cutoff at 23 weeks, meaning that you cannot set sail once you enter your 24th week. The part that people miss is that this applies to the entire voyage. If you board at 22 weeks on a 2-week sailing, you'll be past the cutoff before the cruise ends, and what that means is denied boarding on day 1. Celebrity, Royal, and P&O cruises all apply the 23-week cutoff. You'll need a doctor's letter, and they ask directly on the health questionnaire. So the takeaway here, if you're a pregnant cruiser or cruiser who wants to become pregnant, do the math and make sure that you're doing the math through the last day of the sailing, not just on embarkation day. Number 9, if you arrive at the cruise terminal showing symptoms of gastrointestinal illness, the ship's medical team may screen you before you are allowed to board. And there's a reason for that. I recently took a cruise that actually had a CDC declared outbreak of gastrointestinal issues. So this is very serious with cruising because it can infect a whole cruise. And on the intoxication side, cruise lines are done with being lenient. P&O Cruises published a warning stating that they reserve the right to deny access to the ship for anyone heavily under the influence of alcohol. So the takeaway, save the celebration, save the imbibing for after you're on the ship. Number 10, and this is the most simple on the list. Most cruise lines now require your online check-in to be fully completed before you arrive. I'm talking health questionnaire, emergency contacts, payments, all of that. An unpaid balance, even a small one from some add-on that you didn't think about, can flag your reservation. So the takeaway here, log in a week before you sail. Never, never, never miss that final payment date. I have done it myself. I somehow missed the email and I had an entire cruise get canceled not too far before the cruise. So always stay on top of those dates.